Welcome back to the channel. This is the Action Figure Grader, and we're going to look today, as usual, on a Thursday at some recent sales on eBay for the vintage collection. And we've got lots of vehicles in this batch, including some graded vehicles, which you don't often see for the vintage collection. And I just want to say thanks to those of you that watch. Really appreciate the channel support. Not a terribly exciting lot of items here, but there were a few that I wanted to talk about and discuss. So let's start off with one of those three packs that is gigantic. I don't know what the measurement is on this. I'm sure that some of you who actually own some of these Target exclusive triple 3-packs can speak to the size of this thing. I mean, looking at it, it looks like it's like 4 feet long. I mean, that's what it looks like. They've got the shipping cost on this one at $20. Let me know how you're able to ship this for $20, because this is a pretty large item. But we've seen a few of these sell over the years. This is probably one of the better condition ones. You know, given how big they are, they do get beat up pretty easily, and especially around the edges, like you can see there. But, you know, versus some of the others that we've seen over the years, this one seemed to be in overall pretty good shape, and $100 for that triple 3-pack special action figure set with the Hoth Rebels, Bespin Alliance, and the Imperial set. So that one did sell for $120 shipped. And Power Droid, as usual, did have a few more sales. The first one being a unpunched VC-44 Luke Skywalker Dagobah landing. This one had the dark blue saber variation, which I tend to believe is a little bit more common, but awfully pretty example there for $120 plus $7 shipping. Pretty decent price. Will they go cheaper than that? Yeah, I think so. But I think at this point, you know, we've talked about this, that the Power Droid has got, as you can even see in this photo, that he's got unbelievable amounts of sealed shipper cases full of near mint condition vintage collection. And he puts them in star cases, and so as a result, he tends to get maybe slightly above what a, you know, fair market value is for these. Although I did find this week that sold another VC-44 that sold for $140. So it was, you know, below that number at least, but in general, in an auction, they're going closer to $100, if not below $100 now. He also had a factory sealed mailer box with the VC-61 Boba Fett prototype armor, and that one sold for $70 plus shipping. I mean, good Lord, how much have those fallen in price relative to where they used to go for? So $70 for that. And then he also had an unpunched Sandstorm Princess Leia from the Deleted Scenes Blu-ray, and that also had the Darth Maul offer sticker on there. That one also sold for $120. So just those were kind of the most interesting sales that he had. He obviously had more, but one thing to think about that I hear a lot about in the comments and privately are the reissues and how they're affecting the first iteration or first issue of certain figures. And I think at this point, we've kind of nailed that down and proven that over time, that if they announce a reissue and you're sitting on 1 or 2 or 5 of the first issue, you might want to offload them before they drop precipitously in price. And Starkiller hasn't dropped precipitously, but it has dropped a little bit. This is obviously the first issue with the Darth Maul offer, unpunched for $75, when this used to go for probably, I'd say at the top end, $175. But, you know, more recently, I would say 100 to 125 would be a reasonable number. So that's really come down. The Shock Trooper is another one. That one sold for $75. This was consistently, for an unpunched example, consistently at about 100 to 125. So that one did sell for $75. And we had yet another sale for one of those unpainted, you know, first shot prototypes, or, you know, factory defect, whatever you want to call them. This seller seems to have a ton of them. And I know a bunch of you have bought these, and I'm just curious if you've gotten them back yet from the grading companies. I know that some of y'all sent them in to at least Collector Archive Services. I don't know if AFA grades this kind of thing or not, but you can see the no date stamps on the bottom, unpainted, factory assembled, and that one did sell for $200. Although I wouldn't pay that number, I would try to make an offer on that one. This seller had 3 available. One did sell at 200, but you can make an offer right there. And maybe this one did sell at 200, or, for a make an offer, but at least eBay showing it as sold at $200. But I think max 150 on that. Next up, we've got another data point for the Tonica sisters, and they are coming down in price as I kind of expected. When they first got released and were in collectors' hands, they were going for the pair, let's call it 370, then 350, then 300. Now they're consistently selling for about $125 a piece, or $250 for the pair. I found a number of data points at that price point. Will they continue to drop further? I don't know, but it seems like at least now they've come back down to earth just a little bit, as you would probably expect given the increased supply in resellers' hands. So $250 for that pair, or about $125 a piece. For the Cantina, this was an auction. I did find higher sales prices for a factory sealed in the mailer box Cantina, but in an auction anyway, this one sold for $600 plus $70 shipping for the Cantina Deluxe Edition with all figures. Some other vehicles that sold. We had the B-Wing fighter. This one, I think the box was in decent shape. It wasn't perfect, but in an auction, that one did sell for $210 plus $25 shipping. Maybe a little high, just given that this one did have a little bit of, creasing on the side of the box there. I would try to aim for a little bit less if possible. One that you don't see very often that we haven't talked about is the Empire Strikes Back version, Target exclusive TIE Fighter. Obviously, you see the Walmart edition reissue-ish TIE Fighter that came out a few years ago. You see that one a lot. That one consistently sells for about $100, but this Target exclusive version, ESB packaging, is one you don't see pop up that regularly, and it does command a little bit of a premium relative to the Walmart edition. This one sold for $180, but I don't remember seeing one of those, at least recently, on the channel. So there you go there. Another one that we cover pretty regularly, this one is the AT-AT with the Empire Strikes Back packaging. This was a Toys R Us exclusive. That one did have some issues that you can see on the box. It was not perfect. It had a little ding there at the top of the box, but otherwise pretty decent and factory sealed. That one sold for $600, free shipping as well. That's about the lowest price we've seen recently for the ESB AT-AT, and I think that was a pretty fair deal. Another interesting one was this Katana sail barge, the Haslab. It was at auction in the mailer box. Now, the mailer box did have a pretty major ding going on, so you are taking a little bit of a risk that the contents inside have some issues. But I'm assuming that they packed this. I don't have this. I never bought this, so I don't know. But for those of you that have bought it, I would assume that there was maybe a little bit of protection between the mailer box and the actual packaging, for the retail packaging for the Katana. So that one did have kind of an issue on the mailer box there. You can see lots of dings and scrapes, which it's not terribly surprising just given the size of this thing and going through our wonderful mail system that was in the US. But this one did sell for $21.75, and that was also free shipping. So, that's a pretty reasonable price, I suppose, given that it's free shipping. We have seen higher prices recently, but you are maybe taking a little bit more of a risk that the contents inside are not damaged, and that is the price you pay as the seller without showing it inside the mailer box. Then you're going to get a little bit of a discount. But, we have seen some prices recently as high as $2,500. But that one did sell for $21.75. And then we had some CAS and AFA graded TVC that sold. This was a CAS 85 punched example for VC05, the AT-AT Commander, General Veers, if you want to talk dirty to me. This one was listed for $200 and sold for $150. So $150 was the best offer accepted. And then this seller, as well as one other, had some foil examples that sold at auction. And this one is the VC08 Darth Vader, CAS graded 90. That one sold in an auction for $152.50. Same seller had The Boba Fett VC09 foil US card example, that one sold for $222.50. And interestingly, so that was a CAS 90. Interestingly, an AFA 8.5 sold around the same time frame. That was also the foil example. AFA 8.5 sold for $230. Again, the CAS 90 sold for $222.50. So the market's basically saying that the foil Boba Fett in a CAS 90 is equal to, in value, to an AFA 8.5. So there you go. That was just an interesting comparison. And then going back to that same seller that had some CAS foil examples, they had a CAS 90 foil VC12 Darth Sidious. That one sold for $129.50. And then the Obi-Wan VC16 foil example, also graded CAS 90, sold in an auction for $157.50. This was a beauty. This was an AFA uncirculated 90 Darth Vader Dark Times. Pretty beautiful card there. And that one was listed for $150. The best offer accepted on that was $142, which is not a bad deal for an uncirculated 90. And then, interestingly, a couple of graded vehicles sold. You don't see that very often for the vintage collection, but this was a high grade as well. This was the Target exclusive original issue Target Land Speeder graded AFA 90. Now, obviously, they've reissued this, and again, going back to what we talked about with the Shock Trooper and with Star Killer, this one used to be about $110 to $125 ungraded all day long. And then this one was an AFA 90 and sold for $150. I think if this had been sold prior to the reissued Land Speeder, it probably would have gotten a lot more. Maybe not, but I think it would have gotten a lot more just given that it was a 90 grade. I can't imagine that there's a ton of 90 grades for these on the population report. And then the other one that sold was an AFA 80 plus, and this was a Toys R Us exclusive, the original issue X-Wing fighter. That one sold for $200. So just a few interesting graded vehicles that did sell, and that one did sell at $200 according to eBay. So anyway, that's all I really had. Nothing terribly exciting, but I thought it was worth kind of showing you what some recent sales were this week over for the vintage collection on eBay. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back soon.